Her smile drew me in, but her silence whispered everything I didn't know I needed to hear. The first time he noticed her, it was in the most ordinary of places, a small, sunlit cafe tucked into a quiet street. He had come there for a moment of solitude, a cup of coffee and a break from the blur of his daily routine. Yet the moment he saw her, it felt as if the entire room had shifted, the hum of conversation fading into the background. She was sitting alone at a corner table, casually poised, her fingers idly tracing the rim of her cup. There was something effortless in the way she held herself, a quiet confidence that didn't demand attention but somehow drew it anyway. When their eyes met briefly as he ordered, she gave him a smile, small, almost fleeting, but it carried an ambiguous warmth that lingered in his mind long after he had taken his seat across the room. It was a smile that seemed to say one thing yet hinted at another, friendly recognition, perhaps, or a subtle curiosity. He wasn't sure if it was meant for him, and that uncertainty made it more intriguing. He caught himself stealing glances, noting the delicate curve of her jaw, the way her hair caught the sunlight, and the faint hint of perfume that floated through the air, a soft, floral warmth that seemed to settle around her like a private aura. Every small gesture, the tilt of her head as she looked out the window, the gentle tapping of her fingers on the table, the quiet way she sipped her coffee, seemed laden with meaning, though he couldn't fully interpret it. Unable to resist the pull, he made a tentative effort to start a conversation. A casual comment about the weather, a joke about the cafe's new pastry, small things, nothing imposing. But each attempt was met with her calm, considered silence, punctuated only by another gentle smile. It was not dismissive. Rather, it was quiet, almost thoughtful, as if she were carefully weighing whether to respond. Her silence was deliberate, a soft barrier that both frustrated and fascinated him. It made him lean in, even as it reminded him to stay respectful, to honor the subtle boundaries she was drawing. The tension was quiet but electric. He became aware of every minor sound, the scrape of a chair across the floor, the distant hiss of the espresso machine, the faint click of her nails against her cup. These ordinary noises seemed amplified in the space between them, marking each heartbeat, each unspoken thought. In that moment, he felt the stirrings of something unfamiliar, a curiosity that bordered on longing, tempered by an understanding that whatever this connection was, it would unfold slowly. When he finally left the cafe, he felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and yearning. Her smile had been brief, her silence enigmatic, yet together they had left a mark on him he couldn't ignore. For the first time in a long while, he felt the anticipation of possibility, the quiet thrill of a story just beginning. He didn't know her intentions, and that uncertainty was part of the allure. Already, he found himself imagining their next meeting, wondering whether her smile would appear again, and whether her silence might, someday, speak volumes. After that first fleeting meeting, he found himself noticing her in the most unexpected places. It was never planned, he wasn't seeking her out, but somehow their paths kept crossing, as if the universe had a quiet sense of humor. One afternoon, it was a small park near his apartment. Another day, the corner bookstore where he often lost track of time among the shelves. Each encounter was brief, almost accidental, but each left an echo that lingered long after they parted ways. The intriguing thing was the consistency of her presence, never overbearing, never intrusive, but always noticeable. She moved through these spaces with that same understated grace, a soft attentiveness that made even mundane moments feel significant. When she saw him, her smile appeared again, gentle and warm, yet still holding that slight enigma. He began to notice the rhythm of her expressions, the way her lips curved when amused, the small crease between her brows when she was lost in thought. These details, subtle as they were, started to draw him in more than he expected. Their interactions were minimal but meaningful. Sometimes it was a shared laugh over a dropped book, or an accidental bump in a narrow aisle. The physical closeness was fleeting, but the impact was not. A brush of shoulders that made his pulse skip, the fleeting warmth of her hand as she steadied herself on a step, a glance exchanged across the counter that lingered just long enough to leave him unsettled in the best way. Each moment carried a charge, a quiet tension that neither of them addressed verbally but that spoke volumes. What fascinated him most was how natural the silences felt. Unlike that first meeting, where her quiet had been a puzzle, now it felt like a comfortable pause, a space where unspoken understanding could breathe. When they walked side by side in the park, she didn't need to fill the air with words. He could sense her presence like a soft melody, steady and reassuring. The small movements, her hair catching the light, the tilt of her head as she scanned the horizon, became intimate markers, tiny details that made him feel closer to her even without conversation. At the same time, he caught glimpses of vulnerability beneath her composed exterior. A fleeting frown when she thought no one was looking, a hesitant pause before responding to a casual remark, or the way she occasionally lingered a little too long over a thought before moving on. These glimpses made him see her not just as striking and confident, but as someone quietly complex, with layers she only allowed him to sense in fleeting fragments. By the end of the week, he realized that these repeated, almost accidental encounters were reshaping his days. He anticipated them without fully understanding why, feeling a subtle thrill whenever he caught sight of her. And in her smiles and silences, he began to recognize a rhythm, a quiet dialogue between them that was growing richer and more nuanced. He didn't know if she noticed the same pattern, or if she did, what it meant, but he felt, for the first time, the delicious uncertainty of something beginning to unfold. By now, their meetings had grown into a pattern, quiet and unspoken, each encounter carrying more weight than the last. He had begun to feel as though he knew her, even though most of her life remained hidden behind that calm, confident exterior. And then came the moment that changed everything, a glimpse of the woman beneath the composed surface, a subtle yet profound revelation that left him both captivated and protective. It happened in a setting entirely ordinary, yet suddenly charged with intimacy. Perhaps she was helping someone in need, a stranger struggling with heavy bags, a child lost among park benches. Or maybe she was simply alone, quietly dealing with some private frustration. Her usual serene composure faltered for a fraction of a second, a crease of tension in her brow, a soft exhale that betrayed weariness, or a small, almost imperceptible slump in her shoulders. It was fleeting, and yet he noticed. That tiny break in her mask revealed a vulnerability he hadn't expected, a depth that pulled at something protective and tender within him. He didn't intervene immediately. He understood the importance of space, but he lingered nearby, quietly attentive. He watched as she composed herself, straightening her posture, smoothing her hands over her skirt, and offering a polite, if faint, smile to the world again. Yet the briefness of that unguarded moment had left an impression, like a whisper of wind through the leaves, soft, fleeting, unforgettable. When their eyes eventually met, it was not with the playful warmth of their prior encounters but with a quiet understanding. He didn't need her to explain, she didn't need to say anything. The silence between them spoke volumes. He could sense the weight she carried, the layers of life experience hidden behind her grace, and he felt an urgent yet gentle desire to be present for her, without overstepping. Small gestures became loaded with meaning. When she shifted slightly closer on the park bench, letting her arm brush his, he felt the warmth of her skin and the subtle tremor of a vulnerability she hadn't shown before. She allowed him into her personal space without words, her subtle nods and soft glances inviting trust rather than demanding it. He was keenly aware of every movement, the delicate lift of her fingers as she tucked her hair behind her ear, the soft inhalation when she laughed quietly, the way her gaze lingered on something distant as if sharing a thought with him alone. It was in these details that he began to truly see her. Her smile still held its charm, but now it was deeper, richer, informed by layers of emotion and experience. Her silence was no longer a puzzle or a barrier, it had become a bridge, a way of communicating honesty and subtle intimacy without a single word. By the end of that encounter, he realized he had crossed an invisible threshold. Attraction alone no longer explained the pull he felt toward her. There was admiration, certainly, but also a profound recognition of her inner life, a desire to support her, to share in these quiet, vulnerable moments. For the first time, he sensed that whatever might develop between them would be built not just on smiles or fleeting glances, but on understanding, respect, and the unspoken intimacy that comes from truly seeing someone beneath the surface. The days that followed their quiet, unspoken understanding carried a subtle electricity, an anticipation that neither of them could fully articulate. Their connection had shifted. It was no longer merely about shared glances or accidental encounters. It had begun to include the faint, irresistible pull of proximity. And then, one ordinary moment transformed into something memorable, their first physical touch. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It happened in a way that felt entirely natural, almost inevitable. Perhaps she had stumbled slightly on a slippery pavement, or he reached out to guide her through a narrow doorway, or their hands brushed while reaching for the same book in the bookstore. The contact was brief but deliberate enough to ignite a quiet awareness between them. In that instant, the ordinary world seemed to fade, the distant hum of traffic, the muted chatter of others, all dissolved into the electric warmth of that touch. The first thing he noticed was the subtle heat of her skin against his. Her hand was soft but firm, a weight that seemed to confirm her presence, her trust. She didn't pull away. Instead, she lingered, as if allowing the moment to stretch just slightly longer than necessary. He felt his own fingers tighten almost imperceptibly, reluctant to let go but aware that even this gentle connection demanded patience. It wasn't just the sensation of touch that mattered, it was the emotional resonance. Her brief contact carried reassurance, a silent, "I trust you," that bypassed words entirely. When her fingers brushed his arm, he could sense the slight tremor beneath her calm exterior, a hint of vulnerability mingling with her grace. Their proximity became a conversation of its own, a dialogue built on intuition and sensation rather than speech. He watched her reactions as closely as he felt them himself. The subtle shift of her gaze toward his eyes, the faint quiver of her lips as a smile threatened to appear, the soft inhale she gave when he steadied her, all of it spoke volumes. In that first touch, there was a promise, a recognition of mutual curiosity and interest that neither could yet fully articulate but both understood instinctively. Even after they parted, the memory lingered. He could still feel the warmth of her hand, the subtle pressure of her fingers, the gentle rhythm of their shared heartbeat in that quiet space. It left him aware of a longing that was patient, respectful, and eager all at once, a longing that could only grow through slow, deliberate steps. By the time the day ended, he realized something profound. This connection wasn't fleeting attraction or mere physicality. It was a bridge between their internal worlds, a tactile acknowledgement of trust and unspoken emotion. Their first touch had quietly shifted the dynamic, infusing each subsequent glance, each shared silence, with a deeper resonance. It was the kind of intimate, YouTube-safe moment that lingered in memory, a spark that promised much more without demanding haste. In that small, seemingly insignificant gesture, he felt the beginning of something extraordinary, a slow-burn intimacy that was as thrilling as it was gentle, a connection built not on urgency, but on attention, respect, and the quiet power of touch. As their subtle connection deepened, an undercurrent of tension began to run through every encounter. The warmth of their previous touches, the quiet smiles, and the lingering glances now carried more weight. The male narrator found himself increasingly aware of the age gap between them. His youthful uncertainty contrasted with her seasoned composure, and it stirred a mix of longing and hesitation within him. He wondered if his feelings were appropriate, if the world would judge them, and whether she shared the same internal conflict. Their interactions became charged with a quiet electricity, even in seemingly mundane moments. Perhaps they found themselves walking together in the rain, the drops dampening their clothes, but neither moving away from the accidental closeness. Her coat brushed against his arm, their hands hovered near one another, fingertips occasionally brushing in ways that sent a shiver through him. These fleeting touches were electric, yet neither dared to overstep, both caught in the fragile space between desire and decorum. He became hyper-aware of the smallest details, the way her gaze lingered on him for a fraction longer than necessary, the soft curve of her smile when she realized he was noticing her, the subtle shift in her posture when she approached. Every gesture, every nuance felt weighted with possibility and restraint. He admired her confidence, yet he sensed a flicker of hesitation behind her eyes, a quiet acknowledgement of the social and emotional complexity of their connection. The internal struggle intensified as he compared the simplicity of his desire with the maturity of her perspective. He questioned whether he was ready for the depth she deserved, whether he could navigate the subtlety of her world without overstepping. At the same time, he noticed the silent messages she sent, her shoulders slightly leaning toward him in moments of shared laughter, the warmth of her gaze when she thought he wasn't looking, the brief, almost imperceptible touches that lingered just long enough to stir his imagination. For her part, the woman was equally conflicted. She felt the pull of his youthful sincerity, his open-hearted curiosity, and the quiet attentiveness that set him apart from the rest. Yet she grappled with the implications of their age difference, the social expectations, and the possibility of misunderstanding. Her silences became longer, more deliberate, as she weighed each encounter, each shared smile, and each touch against the backdrop of propriety and desire. One afternoon, as they sat side by side in a small cafe, the weight of their mutual awareness pressed into the quiet space between them. They didn't need words. The brush of her arm against his, the soft inhale she took as he moved closer, and the subtle meeting of their eyes spoke volumes. The tension was palpable, electric, yet restrained, a silent acknowledgement that they were both on the edge of something extraordinary yet complicated. By the end of the day, both recognized the fragile beauty of their connection. Desire was present, unmistakable, yet tempered by respect, patience, and self-awareness. The slow burn of their relationship had reached a point where every glance, every touch, and every pause carried weight, a careful, deliberate dance between longing and hesitation, desire and propriety, curiosity and restraint. It was a delicate, emotionally charged phase, one that promised depth and intimacy, but only if they allowed themselves to navigate it with care. The subtle tension that had been building between them reached a tipping point in a quiet, unassuming moment. Perhaps it was an evening stroll along a dimly lit street, or sitting across from each other in a cozy cafe, the hum of life around them fading into soft background noise. The weight of their unspoken feelings, the curiosity, the admiration, and the cautious desire, finally found a channel through which it could flow. It began with small admissions, the kind that don't demand words but carry immense emotional weight. He noticed her fingers trembling slightly as she stirred her coffee, the faint quiver betraying her composed exterior. She met his eyes for a long moment, and in that silent exchange, it was clear she had been wrestling with her feelings just as intensely as he had. Encouraged by the intimacy of the pause, he spoke first, not with declarations, but with quiet honesty. He told her how much he admired her, not merely for her beauty or confidence, but for the depth and subtlety of her presence, the way she seemed to understand the world without needing to announce it. She listened, her gaze softening, the faintest curve of a smile brushing her lips. For the first time, words bridged the gap their silences had maintained, and she responded, not with grand statements, but with honesty that carried weight. She admitted to moments of uncertainty, to the social constraints and self-doubts that had kept her guarded, and to the unexpected comfort and joy she felt in his company. Her voice was calm, yet there was an underlying tremor, a vulnerability that reached past his careful admiration and spoke directly to his heart. The physical world reflected the intimacy of the moment. He reached out and lightly brushed a strand of hair from her face, and she allowed it, leaning slightly into the gesture. The warmth of her skin, the subtle rhythm of her breathing, and the soft brush of her shoulder against his all communicated what words could only hint at. Their eyes locked, and in that gaze there was recognition, of longing, of trust, and of an emotional intimacy that neither had fully allowed themselves to feel until now. Time seemed to pause. Each heartbeat, each inhale, became magnified in significance. They spoke of hopes, of fears, and of the small moments that had brought them to this point, the smiles, the silences, and the fleeting touches that had slowly woven an invisible thread between them. There was no rush, no urgency. Every word, every glance, every slight movement carried deliberate meaning. By the end of the conversation, the air between them had shifted. Walls had fallen, replaced by mutual understanding, trust, and a deep emotional connection. They did not need to define the future. The present was enough, filled with a quiet certainty that whatever lay ahead would be built on honesty, respect, and shared vulnerability. For the first time, the narrator truly felt that their relationship could move beyond curiosity and restraint. The slow burn had found its fire, not in dramatic gestures, but in the quiet, deliberate act of seeing each other completely and accepting it. Their bond had grown from fleeting glances into something solid, tender, and profoundly human, laying the foundation for the resolution to come. After weeks of subtle glances, fleeting touches, and unspoken tension, their connection reached a quiet, yet unmistakable resolution. It wasn't marked by grand gestures or dramatic confessions, but by a profound sense of mutual understanding and emotional harmony. The male narrator and the woman found themselves in a calm, ordinary setting, a park bench overlooking a gentle stream, the fading sunlight painting golden streaks across the water. The world around them existed, but it felt secondary, almost irrelevant, compared to the closeness between them. Their conversation was soft, tentative, yet filled with the warmth of honesty. They spoke of small things, books, music, favorite walks, but the true dialogue lay in the pauses, the glances, and the delicate touches that punctuated their words. When he reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek, she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned slightly into his hand, her eyes soft with trust. Fingers intertwined naturally, as if they had always belonged together, and the simple act of holding hands conveyed a depth of feeling that words could not capture. Her smile, which had once been enigmatic, now aligned with her emotions. It was a smile that expressed warmth, affection, and quiet joy, reflecting the emotional intimacy they had built together. Her silence, too, had transformed. It was no longer a puzzle or a barrier, but a space of comfort, a shared understanding that needed no explanation. When she rested her head lightly on his shoulder, the subtle weight was a gentle confirmation of the bond they had nurtured through careful observation, patience, and respect. The narrator, in turn, felt a sense of calm fulfillment. The nervous excitement of their early encounters had matured into steady admiration and affection, a grounding warmth that spoke of stability and emotional depth. He was keenly aware of every small detail: the soft brush of her hair against his cheek, the warmth of her hand resting in his, the faint rhythm of her breathing as she leaned close. These simple gestures, once charged with tentative curiosity, now radiated a quiet confidence in their shared connection. Even the surrounding world seemed to honor the moment. The rustling leaves whispered softly in the breeze, the distant laughter of passers-by faded into a comforting background, and the gentle trickle of water from the stream mirrored the steady cadence of their hearts. In these ordinary elements, the extraordinary nature of their bond was amplified, not through spectacle, but through the intimate resonance of two people who had chosen to see and understand each other fully. By the end of the day, there was a sense of gentle completion. The story of their slow-burn connection had reached its natural conclusion, not with a climactic declaration, but with an enduring warmth. They walked together, side by side, shoulders occasionally brushing, hands clasped loosely, sharing smiles and glances that spoke volumes. It was the quiet fulfillment of desire, respect, and emotional intimacy, proof that love can be patient, tender, and deeply human. In that moment, everything aligned. Her smile and her silence, once contradictory and mysterious, now harmonized perfectly. The slow-burn journey had transformed curiosity and hesitation into understanding, trust, and mutual affection. And as they continued their walk, the gentle rhythm of their steps mirrored the quiet beat of a connection that was complete, enduring, and profoundly satisfying.